Hello and welcome to RuggaMatrix International. I'm your host, Jero Sen, and this is Ben Kimber.
Jero, how are you, buddy?
Very good, thank you very much, Ben. And of course, it is the end of the Four Nations Rugby Championship and that last Bledisloe, and the spring tours are underway this week. Some interesting games. The USA is hosting, the United States is hosting the All Blacks, and Ireland, of course, the British Barbarians against South Africa, and Australia starts its tour up against Wales. So lots to talk about over the next half hour. Ben Kimber, though, first, your strike issue of the week.
Strike issue of the week, mate, and this very well be playing into Cheika's hands. Some suggestion that press conference was all about misdirection and getting us talking about stuff other than the fact that the Wallabies got smacked. But I think it's ahead of this tour, and which is a hugely important tour for the Wallabies and a very, very important tour for Cheika as coach. I think we've got to talk about the Wallabies' mindset and Cheika's passion.
So there's nothing wrong with passion for the game, but when passion gets in the way, and as we talked about at the end of the show last week with Tony Johnson from New Zealand, passion needs to be used in the right way. So if you're over the top, throwing things around the coach's box, looking like things aren't under control, that's the worst thing for a coach. You always have to look like it could be going to hell in a handbasket very quickly, but you've got to look like it's all under control because everyone looks to you for leadership.
Yeah, exactly right, Jero. And shout out to Shannon Davis, one of our Facebook commentators, who made a good comment about this, particularly the way that Cheika's passion might influence the players. And the reason I wanted to talk about it was there were those moments we saw in that last Bledisloe where we saw good rugby from the Wallabies, not good enough in the end. The scoreline was a big one. They did get smacked. But the body language on the field, Bernard Foley, who looked like the toys went out of the cot when the try was disallowed. Yeah. So instead of resetting, is that where the Wallabies lost it in the mind, when they lost the game in their mind, when they didn't get that decision go their way? Stephen Moore talking about the jersey after the game in a cartoon in a newspaper just didn't seem where you wanted the Wallabies captain's head to be. Now, I want to talk about passion specifically, and I'm going to actually delve into rugby league a little bit here, because I see it a bit there too from an ex-Wallaby player who's a big rugby league figure, and Ricky Stewart. Now, Ricky Stewart's a very polarising figure in rugby league, and he goes off the handle. Every time they lose, something's happened. The refs are doing something wrong. He's fronted refs personally after games before and been called out for it. And every time he goes off the rails, you'll see that some of the journalists who work with him and get stories off him clearly, who'll say, "Oh, it's all about his passion." Now, I think there's a really fine line between passion and just being a bit of a dickhead sometimes, right? I think to say that screaming and ranting and raving is a passionate response I think that really denigrates what actual passion is. The likes of a Richie McCaw or a David Pocock, and we always do hold those guys up as representative of the way you want people to behave. But to say they aren't passionate because they don't rant and rave and scream, I don't think is fair in any way, shape or form. So particularly with Cheika, you've got to wonder the way that he is carrying on, and I'm saying that deliberately, carrying on, up on his feet and screaming. We talked about the coach's box last week and the calm that you can see when the All Blacks are under pressure, and the two guys next to Hansen who are both experts sitting there with him, and they're doing it together. And you go to the coach's box and there's Cheika, who's up on his feet and screaming on his own, and you can't even see if Stephen Larkin's sitting near him, but you don't feel like there's a collective answer coming. You feel like there's an emotional response. And I don't think that, as a team, that is a viable long-term ability to get your team in the right space. It might work for you in short terms, World Cup campaign, we're all in this together, boys, we're in the trenches, but I don't think that's going to be the way you're going to build a long-term effective team. What do you think?
Well, I think that that's actually morphed from that passion in the coaching box into a siege mentality for the Wallabies. And you talked about Stephen Moore, who's a really great guy, but he got caught up in the whole Clowngate sort of scenario, and then felt like he had to defend the coach. And, when you start getting distracted by things like that, you really start to move away from the core plan. And Australia had a really good plan in that final test match. They played direct, they played with purpose, and put the All Blacks under pressure like we haven't seen for some time. But the distraction of the clown thing has come out of this siege mentality. And now the Brumbies used to have a wonderful siege mentality. Many teams do it. Ricky Stewart does it with his teams. A lot of coaches do it. But after a while, it wears you down. It's actually quite sapping to maintain the rage, because you need to get out there and think clearly. Now, the former coach of Australia, Ewan McKenzie, who I know well, probably be criticised for being too calm. But underneath that physique, that massive physique of his, and that massive intellect, was a fair bit of passion bubbling there. So
that's exactly my point, right? It's not
but
fair to say
it out of the right
outbursts
time.
are passionate, right? That's not fair to what genuine passion is.
Yeah, I think it's a very simplistic way of looking at it. So someone like Ewan would get his point across because he'd need to get the players thinking about specifics, whether it's from the kickoff. Get out there. They're going to kick deep, or they're going to kick to the sideline, whatever. Just get them focused on those immediate moments of the game. So they need to make sure as a playing group they don't get caught up with this, it's great, fist of passion, and it's great to see that when a guy scores a try. But in the coach's box, it doesn't do you any good. I once heard that an assistant who was at the Waratahs, he was on the fringes, said that Ewan should send the message down to the playing group, stop dropping the ball. So I don't think that message actually went through because it's one of the most ridiculous messages you've ever heard of. Like, yeah, boys, don't drop the ball. Great. I think I'm glad we're paying all those experts and consultants all that money. So you can get carried away with this stuff in the box. What you need is calm heads, and you don't need your players looking up thinking they're throwing, as you said, the toys out of the cot when it doesn't go your way. You need to be calm on the field. Now, if the Wallabies, when they had that try disallowed, got back and said, okay, let's refocus like the Wallabies of 1991 did, focused on winning that quarterfinal against Ireland and making it all the way through to the final and winning the World Cup, that's when you know you've got a really good team. So I think you're absolutely right. The passion and craziness and the carry-on is one thing, but it shouldn't be mistaken for being really good coaching.
Yeah, and as you said, it is that short-term effectiveness.
Yeah.
That you can get a team revved up and running at something, but then after that, what? Yeah. How do you go into the next session and the next thing? You can't live in a siege mentality. Now,
it's exhausting, Ben.
It is. And now Ian Payton, the Daily Telegraph rugby reporter, had a
quote,
had an anonymous quote. Pato, good man, had an anonymous quote for a player saying they love it when Cheika gets out there and does that. And I don't think that speaks well of the team's mentality. And we're really comparing this right now to the All Blacks, who have just set a world record for tests, clearly on top. They've clearly got things going the way they want them to go. And talk to any of them, and it's about mental preparation, right? And specifically, and again, Shannon pointed this out to me in his Facebook post. The All Blacks have their team manager / mental coach, a guy called Gilbert Anoka, and I posted a link to a story which I read about him, which was fascinating. But the way he's got that team thinking about their calmness and finding their own way to get their mind right. Brad Thorne would throw a bit of water on himself to reset his mind. I think Richie McCaw would stamp their feet, but they were all training to say how they get their mind in the right place. And when you look at that Wallaby team, who clearly showed they have the talent, right, to compete, you've got to think it's upstairs, and you've got to question that if Cheika's, bullish, they're all against us or we're going to smash them here, isn't going to work for that, against that preparedness of we've got this worked out. We've got the process. We know how to do this, and we're going to do it together. It feels like a very different mindset in the team.
Yeah, and look, that quote may be okay if in isolation it was this guy's got our back. That's sort of a different story when teammates and coaches have your back, and you'd expect them to do that. But in those situations, they're going to fight to the death for you, and that's great. But when it then spills out of the coach's box, into the press conference afterwards, into the community, and it just looks bad where you're not being humble in defeat and you're not being humble in victory as well, which is also important. I think you need to be able to then check yourself. So Michael Cheika is a good bloke, and he's a passionate bloke, and he knows his rugby, and he was a good player for Randwick back in the day. But he needs a team around him to help him in those moments. And I think the tours come at a good time for them because they can really concentrate. But I'm just worried that the Australians will go on this tour and become insular and have the world against them. The world isn't against them. The Australian team and Australian rugby have been world leaders. So they're looking to Australia to become innovative again, which Australian teams of the past, like Mark Ella we had here, Brett Papworth, were very smart teams that were able to play over and above their ability at many times to win a game of rugby. And that's the beauty of rugby. Scotland's got to be taking on some teams from the Southern Hemisphere, and they have a limited player base, but they play above their weight all the time. So there's all different ways of playing the game of rugby. So don't chase the All Blacks. Australia should try and play their own, and South Africa should play their own way as well.
Now, just before we get into the tour, I want to close out on this Checker stuff. It was clearly the big talking point out of the game, as potentially, as I said, perhaps which is what Checker wanted. Yeah. But Giro, I wanted to get some thoughts from you specifically, because there was all this talk around the coach being prepared to face the media, how he might have been talking about it. Now, I know for a fact that Adam Fryer has been the media manager for the Wallabies. He wasn't in Auckland, so there'd been a bit of a change in the management of the team there. But I also saw there was a story from, I think, Spiro Zavos on the Raw, saying that, this is just like Eddie Jones, who was kept away from, the media for hours when he was upset with the refs, etc., etc. So I want you to tell us what happens, right? When you're with a team, you're a part of that team, and you're responsible for that press conference. How do you work with a coach who might be ropeable after getting smacked or a bad decision?
So it's quite busy being after a game, so you have to service your television, media and everything else. But you do need to grab 3 or 4 minutes with the coach and devise the media spin from there. And I'm not saying that it's a way of telling the public porky pies, but it's a way of coming out what may have been a pretty heartbreaking loss, maybe a savage loss, and then tell the public, the supporters of the game, why your Australian team didn't perform or why they performed tonight. So you do grab the coach for a couple of minutes. Sometimes they're angry, and you'll have that honest discussion, stuff that you can't say because you might get fined by your own body because of the way you react to referees. So the initial response from the coach could be wildly different and very aggressive. But by the time you get to that press conference room, you need to sit down and be balanced about it. And, Eddie it was a bit like Michael Checker in a way, because he didn't care what other people thought of him. He was prepared to come out and spray everyone, and he still does that now. So I tried to work with him on that to try and become more balanced and not be so aggressive in some points that were unnecessarily aggressive, if you know what I mean. Like, you don't need to go out and
say like a newspaper cartoon?
I didn't want Australia to be hated by a lot of people around the world, and we are. The Australian way of playing sport, with cricket in particular, is despised by many people around the world, and we're not all like that. We are competitive on the field and wherever we play, in everything we do. But our leaders, including our coaches and captains, can't sit there, look like they got chips on both shoulders, and then start to whinge and moan about everything, particularly when you lose by big margins and you don't really have any respect, because you can't go out and bag people because you got towelled up by the All Blacks. You can't say you were robbed. And several times this year, Australia can't complain about being robbed because they were towelled up. So in those discussions, Ben, to bring this point to a conclusion, you do pull back and you discuss what are the key points, but you always try and come out with some sort of humility. And that is tough, because sometimes the coaches want to get a particular point across. And once you sit them down, they are out of your hands, because they can then get driven on a tangent you may not have thought of. But you do get those moments, and you try and get some sort of narrative out of the game. And it might be a trend in the refereeing that you want to identify, and you go for that. And that is clear. Or it might be a message to your own playing group. You will give it to the players directly, but you want to get that message around to them as well, through the press as well. But I always thought that was a bad way to go. You've got to be upfront with your players, but the message to them should be solid on one-on-one, but also publicly. Don't send mixed messages to them. So yes, keeping Eddie away from press conferences because of what he thought about referees, that's been overdone a bit. I mean,
well, I think he said a couple of hours in his story.
No, we said, come on, we'd talk about things straight afterwards.
Mate, that would have been the story at the time, right? As a journo, after a game, when you're sitting there waiting for the coach, if someone was keeping him away for a couple of hours to cool him down, you'd know, you'd find out.
So Eddie was always fired up after the game, and I loved working with him. But and many different coaches, like Ewan McKenzie as well, we discuss in quite detail as much as we can between the full-time whistle and the game itself. So so the point about Australia now is, yes, they would have clearly discussed before they went to their press conference what the plan of attack would have been, talking to the media in New Zealand. after that third Bledisloe.
Well, I don't know if that plan was a particularly solid one then, because I want to talk now about how that's going to roll into this tour, right? Now, Cheika's made himself a target, perhaps deliberately, and I think unnecessarily in a lot of ways. He could have done a lot of other things in that press conference and handled it very differently. We've already seen some other cartoons start to come out, and now he's going to the home of where you're going to get touched up by the press if anything's going on.
Yeah.
We've already heard Eddie make a couple of cracks. Eddie's been out in the press saying send in the clowns with a big smile on his dial, because Eddie loves that mental, back and forth, and he's got ammunition in both holsters right now, ready to go.
Yeah.
So Cheika's going to be under the pump up north, and I tell you what, they kick off against Wales, anything less than a win, and it's going to be a unbelievably a lot of pressure in that tour.
Yes, so I've given Australia a 65% chance. I don't know how I've come up with that,
The
but it's
weatherman,
very
mate.
scientific chance of winning the Grand Slam. And it really disappoints me how the Grand Slam anticipation's been sort of diminished over the years, because it holds such a significant part in Australian history. And the longer we go without winning them, I think the more it will be.
Well, you can't talk too much about it, surely.
Yeah.
There's 4 games and
Yeah.
there's 5 on this tour.
Yeah.
You can't talk too much about it. You've got to get out there and start winning.
I think the problem is that you lose the first game and then it's all over. So the Grand Slam is a grand sham or something like that.
Yeah.
So imagine all the headlines that'll come out after that. Even in a dodgy win over Wales could be a point of criticism too for Australia, given that they played really well against the All Blacks. But you never know with Wales, because they've got so much talent and how they can play the game. So first up, you got to say Australia should win the game. But look, I am not betting on that. No way, Ben Kimber, that Australia are going to win that first test as a 100% guarantee.
No. We're interested to see the teaming names too. Now, I'm assuming it won't have Korobidi, the rugby league convert, on the wing. There's a lot of controversy in the selection of the Wallabies team around Marika Korobidi, the Melbourne Storm winger, getting put into the squad, as he revealed exclusively himself accidentally a few months ago that he was given the nod that he'd get that. Some discussion around, is it cheapening the jersey to hand it straight to a guy who hasn't played rugby since he was a youngster, I think, in Fiji. I hope I haven't got that wrong, but he has got some background in rugby.
He's got some pedigree,
but he hasn't played it for a long time.
Correct.
He's got genuine wheels. He's fast, but where he comes into play on this tour, is it just to get him accustomed to the environment? A lot of talk around, Wallabies fans around Luke Morahan getting left out, who is a genuinely solid player for Korobidi. Your thoughts on that, mate?
I can't believe they've done it, because all the talk was we were over the stuff, and I think actually Wendell Saylor, Lottie Takiri and Matt Rogers were actually valuable recruits, because they brought amazing talent. And Wendell was this big wide runner as well, because when he ran the ball, it took 6 blokes to bring him down. So they were valuable players back then, and they were massive names. Korobidi is a good player, but he's not in the same realm of those names back at the turn of the century when they were signed for the Waratahs and of course for the Wallabies back in the day, and of course Queensland as well. So I think I can't believe they signed him. A winger. I mean, we have got a number of players that can really play well on the wing, and we've got one bloke that should be playing on the wing who isn't. Probably is Israel Folau. If he's not playing on the wing, then put him in the centre. Make a decision on that. So I'm good luck to him. I hope he does well, but I still can't believe they did it.
No, I'm with you. I think it was the wrong move. I just don't see what they're going to get out of this. And, admittedly, Cheika's the coach. He's the guy who's got to build this over years, so he's making his calls for his own reasons. But you can't see him genuinely picking the guy to play in a test match. You've got a squad, you've got enough players out there. Sure, there's a bit of room there now, possibly with Folau having to come into the centres. And I hope that we might see the back line we talked about a while back with Hodge at 12, Folau at 13, and Hale at Petty at fullback. I'd love to see that. But I can't really see that there's a game where you'd want to bring him in cold, where he hasn't really had a chance to get involved. So, as with players who came across from the league previously, the Matt Rogers, the Wendell Saylors, the Lottie Takiris, who ended up having a season of Super Rugby, that's where you're going to find out where Korobidi is. Now, maybe if you'd picked your 32 players and you wanted to chuck him on as a non-playing member of the squad because you think he's going to be in future, maybe, but at the expense of a guy who might genuinely be needed. I hope I'm proven wrong. I hope he gets a game and kills it. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it should have been happening.
No, but we're entitled to make an assumption or an assessment of his capabilities in rugby. But if you look at how the other guys went when they immediately started, I mean, you remember covering Matt Rogers when he first came across, the amount of times he got caught without being able to recycle the ball. He
Took him a while.
And out of position.
Yeah.
And that took him a long time to get used to it. So will Australian rugby be tolerant of the amount of time that Koroibete takes to make that transition when you've got so many other players who can do it? And the other thing is, winger in rugby is so much different to winger in rugby league. It is not funny. There are so many more responsibilities, and it is a specialist position. Like, you just don't say, okay, he's okay as a back, but let's whack him on the wing.
Yeah.
Nah. Look at the wingers for the All Blacks.
Yeah. And this is where we talk about those guys we've said before, like the Adam Ashley Coopers of the world, or the Conrad Smiths, who were just intuitive rugby players. You know, their positional play and all that kind of stuff is there.
The vision is
having
so
to adapt
important.
is massive.
Yeah.
Having to adapt is massive.
To know where to be on the field and to know where your trailing supporters are going to be.
Yeah.
And so Matt Rogers was so good that he'd make a massive break and be caught on his own, isolated, and then turning the ball over, and then the opposition actually gets an advantage on the break. So it's and it took a while, but he eventually got used to it. So it is not easy, and I think it was totally unnecessary to do it, but he might prove us all wrong.
Yeah, a couple more guys I want to talk about in the Wallabies quickly before we move on to the All Blacks tour. But Genia's loss, I think, for two of those games is a big one. I think it's Wales at the start and England at the finish because they're outside the test window.
Yeah.
Nick Phipps didn't have a happy game, I think, in that even though Australia played well, Phipps
a lot of our supporters gave him a rap on
I disagreed.
websites.
I disagreed. I thought I saw a couple of knock-ons that cost us big time. I think he tried to keep it more simple than he has previously. You know, he's been known to go off a little bit and try a bit too hard. So I think he kept it a little more simple. But I'd actually say I'd rather see Frisbee be given the chance if Genia is not available, and Genia isn't. But I think not having Genia for England is a big one. So if Cheika can't wrangle that, I'm quite concerned about that as an issue.
All right, so before we get to our Strike Viewer comments of the week, Ben, let's discuss the All Blacks and South Africa on their tours. So South Africa have a bit of a warm-up game against the British Barbarians. So what should the South Africans be looking to get out of this game?
Look, they're in worse shape than Australia, right? They really are. What style they want to play, what players they have available, their best backline, their best pack. I think they're up in the air. I saw Peter Steph du Toit got their Player of the Year the other day, and I thought he was one of the worst offenders in that smacking they got from the All Blacks. Yeah. So clearly it was outside of that game that he was playing the kind of footy that made him their best player. So they are, well, we've said before, we think there's a path back for them because they have a broader playing base that they can try and work a structure into. But they really are on struggle street. And we've talked before about Joel Stransky and Schalkberger saying what sort of issues they have. So they've got to find the game they want to play, and they've got to have a few players stand up. So in a lot of ways similar to the Wallabies, in that, it's nice to see the Wallabies second rowers for the last couple of games start to find that combo. A couple of big, tall timbers there that are going to make a difference. But the Boks have got a lot of work to do on what their team is about. Now, Wallabies have as well, but I think Cheika's got a better mindset of how he wants them to play, if not the right mindset to driving ongoing performance. But there's a lot for this Boks team to work out.
Absolutely. So their program's pretty small compared to what the All Blacks and the Wallabies are doing on the spring tours. So the All Blacks, they're in America at the moment. They're going to play Ireland, and it's the first of two tests against them because in a couple of weeks they'll play Ireland in Ireland. Retallick's unavailable for this game, but Aaron Smith's going to be back in the calculations, obviously, for the tour. Gee, what a luxury, calling back Aaron Smith.
Yeah. Well, I think TJ Perenara's been going really well, I can tell, because I'm starting to dislike him. So I think he must be doing quite well. Aaron Smith coming back is a massive bonus and a benefit. I think we will see Hansen rotate. They've done this in the past. The game that Beauden Barrett had against Australia, he's copped a bit of flack for. They've said since that he's been a bit crook. Tell me this, do they sometimes say players are a bit off colour when they've had a bad game when they haven't been crook? I'm not suggesting the Wallabies ever did that. Do you think that happens?
Yeah, possibly. Yes,
all right.
possibly.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, but isn't it more about Beauden Barrett's goal kicking?
Yeah.
I think as a game, I don't have much of a problem with him.
Yeah, he wasn't his normal self, but the Wallabies pack
They put pressure on,
right? And I've said before there was too much talk around is Beauden Barrett better than Dan Carter? The answer still is clearly no. Come back to me in 3 years' time when Beauden Barrett's been under pressure and shown that he can continually deliver the way Carter always did. Not within Kui yet for me.
Delivers a World Cup.
Yeah. Aaron Cruden's going to get a bit of a shock because they want to keep him around. They want to make sure that he's feeling like he's part of the team. So there'll be some interesting things that we see Hansen play with, I think, in the team. The centre combo's looking much more settled. He'll try a bit more out in that second row because really those two second rows are getting up there now in terms of games. The Tuipulotus of the world are going to come in, so you'll want to see them start to get that more of a combo going. Owen Frank's just recommitted to New Zealand, so he's not going to go overseas, so there's some certainty there. They should clean sweep their tour, but Ireland have got plenty of fight in them, and I'm sure that they'll give them a bit of a run.
It's amazing how we think it's a big deal, the Grand Slam, but the All Blacks do it all the time. They just sweep their European and Northern Hemisphere tours without much of a problem. So, interesting. So the question here is, will Ireland be hardened from 2 tests against the All Blacks? Will that count in their favour when they play Australia?
My feeling is that they'll probably be hardened, but you never know. It's going to come down to the nature of the games. We saw this with Argentina in the Rugby Championship, when they put on that 60-minute effort in New Zealand and had a really big game, and they were right in it, and then they got wiped away. And we said at the time, we suspect that means they're going to be out of gas, and they went over to Perth and they were, right? Even though they had the ball for much of the game, they couldn't pull it off, right? And the Wallabies got them. They got that, I think those first 3 tries in the first 10 minutes or so. So it'll come down to me to the nature of the games. If they're bruising battles and they just end up getting torn apart, they might feel like their mentality isn't there and they might be struggling to come back and face Australia. But you never know, right? If they actually get in those games and they find themselves deep in those games right in them, I think that's dangerous for Australia.
Absolutely. And one more thing on this. England waiting at the end for Australia. Eddie Jones says, well, they won't be sending in the clown straight away because it's the last game, but it's a backhanded, forward-handed compliment, whatever you want to say. England waiting at the end, and Eddie Jones will have something special.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
No doubt about it. And again, I think Eddie's had a fair bit of not luck, but he's had a nice structure coming in as this England coach. Right, it was a fairly weak Six Nations, and they took that. He got Australia on the downslope, I think, and I don't think England were anywhere near New Zealand. I think he got Australia on the downslope and took a valid 3-0 victory there. But even now, getting Australia as the last game on their tour, he gets a couple of games to get his team up and moving for what will be a big game against Australia. I sincerely hope that we have a Grand Slam on the line against England. Oh. Can you imagine the week of Eddie Jones and the lead up to that and how much we'll get out of that? So that is going to be a massive game. He's lost a few, like Itoje, the second rower. He's had a few in the wars, so it'll be interesting to see what he shapes through the next couple of weeks.
It'll be great for the game. What a way to end the spring series with Australia playing for the Grand Slam against England, the old enemy. Now let's move on to the strike viewer comments.
Mate, another great week of comments. Please, as we said before, share it out to your friends on Facebook, and I've got a shout out there to Petey Ferretti.
Also, can I jump in? Please also subscribe to us on YouTube. There's more, and like us on Facebook as well. So we need those likes and subscribers, please. Spread the word. Thank you.
So Petey Ferretti, big call out to him. He shared it with about 10 mates. Thanks, Petey, and that was a good conversation there. Julius Kafer said, take the show on the road to a rugby club, and do it there.
Kafer.
Yeah, not a big, different spelling, but he didn't make any mention of Nigel Owen, so can't be related. Dyes88 said, tell TJ to stop giving away New Zealand secrets, but a lot of great support for having TJ on the show, and we'd love to get him back in future.
How good was he?
Plenty of talk about Checker. Michael Abbey said a Checker outburst is really going to affect the team. I think we've talked about that. Lewis Don thought it was a deliberate tactic to set the team up as bad boys ahead of their tour of Europe. Mark Robertson said it was clearly affecting more. And Seth Prescott and Raymond Mahare said Checker really ruined the night, which I think was very much from our Kiwi fans. Nehana Dew talked about the Fibs game and Genia absence. We've also talked about that. A couple of shout-outs to some of the guys who are there week in and week out commenting. Tina T always jumps in with great comments.
Always backing us up too.
Welcome to Mike Crawford, who rates us higher than the breakdown on NZTV. We like that feedback. Bruce Tucker and David El Papa sent great private messages with stories about rugby, and we're going to try to convince them to put some more on the public pages.
Actually, just on that, we've had some wonderful messages that haven't been public, and I think that's a technical thing more than anything else. And so we are engaging with them privately, but we'd love to see more of those go public because it's just tremendous. Yeah.
And the final one, my strike viewer comment of the week is Morahan McKay, who suggested that we give away TJ's book. So we're going to do that.
It's always good giving away someone else's stuff.
It is. But the first person to get one will be Marama. So Marama, I'll reach out to you and get a book on its way to you. And the next couple of weeks we'll work out who of our viewers, whether it's a comment of the week or most shares or something, gets a book from Tony Johnson.
Absolutely, absolutely. Fantastic. And we are thinking about, after Darren Ormsby came up with the idea, about maybe doing some tours down the track. So as we develop, we'll gauge some interest out there about doing tours and doing shows on the road. We're definitely going to do something around Christmas or thereabouts with the program on the road. So
yeah, so let us know if you'd like to be involved in a live show with us or something.
Yeah. So just throw the ideas at it, and even if you don't want to put it on the public page, just send us a direct message on the RuggaMatrix Facebook page, and we'll have a look at it. Absolutely. So the show's been going gangbusters, and we are approaching on YouTube alone. 1 million viewing minutes in the last 2 months alone.
Massive.
So
thank you all.
Thank you very much. And since we've sort of remodeled the show with Ben and myself and our guests in the great new studio, the response has been terrific. And our New Zealand audiences, we really want to thank you for coming on board as well. It's been absolutely terrific to have you involved in our humble little show, which is starting to take on the world. So Ben, that is it for RuggaMatrix International episode 226. Anything you'd like to say on the way out?
Only as always, mate, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, please like us, share us, tag a friend.
There he is, Ben Kimber joining us. I've been Juro Sen, and this has been another episode of RuggaMatrix International. Until next week, enjoy your rugby.